The best part about tagging along to my wife's corporate party was that it gave me a reason to take my Challenger out for a drive. The downside? The faster I went, the quicker I'd end up there. The party was at her company's lodge, a good 30 miles stretched down an open road. No stop signs, no traffic lights, no congestion, just a perfect route for the Challenger to stretch its legs. But, of course, it also meant no gas stations or stores along the way. Karen and I had been growing apart ever since both our daughters got married. I'd hoped we'd get closer, but that wasn't in the cards. She insisted I go to this event, even though I'd made it clear it wasn't my thing. Usually, she went solo to these work functions. Karen loved a good drink and socializing, while I couldn't stand either. I'd have a beer now and then, sure, but she was a social butterfly and I wasn't. For the past year, I'd been suspecting she might be seeing someone else. And honestly, I didn't much care. That indifference was probably part of why we were drifting. I found myself just waiting for the right chance, searching for a way to end things between us. I needed a way out of this marriage. I'll admit, maybe I'm part of the reason Karen started looking for something different. You could call me an eccentric minimalist. Growing up dirt poor, my brothers and I had way less than the other kids. We didn't have bikes, toys, pets, fancy gadgets. None of that. It was like being Amish without the religion. I knew how the regular world operated, but it just didn't appeal to me. I believed in living within my means, staying debt-free, paying bills on time, and putting a bit aside for later. You don't have to be extreme to live comfortably and simply, but self-control is a must. Having a few small indulgences can help you blend in a bit more. My biggest indulgence? My family. It took me a long time to find someone who could put up with my quirks and see my oddities as just part of who I am. Karen grew up in a modest household, too, so she was used to living simply. She didn't embrace it quite like I did, but she tolerated it. Over the years, though, she seemed to shift, especially once the girls were born. She started leaning more toward a regular, mainstream life. I didn't love it, but I got it. We bought a small, sensible house, dressed a little better, and Karen started taking care of herself more, doing her makeup and getting her hair done from time to time. We even got a couple of last year's smartphones. When the girls grew up, Karen picked up a job at an office. Not much pay, but it kept her busy. She needed a car, so we bought her a little Honda, same as mine. Her paycheck barely covered the car, her lunches, and her new work wardrobe, but I didn't mind. As for me, my name's James Miller, probably one of the most common names you'll ever hear. I work as an assembly worker at a local plant that makes industrial compressors. The job's repetitive, but I like it that way. It suits me just fine. Every now and then, they offer me a promotion, but I always turn it down. I never told Karen about my other indulgence, the one I kept from her. I figured it was smart to stash away something for retirement. Whenever I could, I'd buy a 1-ounce gold Krugerrand. I had over 30 of them stowed in the basement safe, and I wasn't planning on stopping there. My last big splurge was a 1970 Challenger. My older brother Paul, who worked on an offshore oil rig, left it to me when he passed. I could afford to maintain it, but those insurance premiums were brutal. Karen seemed to be thriving at Robertson and Company. She'd been getting regular pay raises and moving up the ranks. In her first year, she'd talk my ear off about work, but after a while, that chatter started to fade. Now, she hardly mentioned her job or her colleagues at all. I knew something was off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. Tonight, I hoped to get a better idea. This company gathering was more like a retreat, a whole weekend thing. I didn't feel comfortable going, to be honest. I'd met her coworkers here and there, and frankly, I wasn't too fond of any of them. Once we got off the federal highway in Holbrook, I could finally let the Challenger roar a bit. It handled just like I expected, smooth and powerful. Karen looked uneasy with the speed but didn't say much. Yep, I was definitely going over the limit, but I couldn't care less. James, what's the hurry? We've got all the time in the world to get there. Can't you ease up a little? She asked. I'm not racing to get there. Believe me. You know, I didn't even want to go. I'm just letting the engine breathe a bit, giving it a good stretch. Please, don't ruin my mood. This weekend's important for my career, James. Mrs. Robinson specifically said it'd be good for you to be here too, Karen replied. And Robinson was the wife of Evan Robinson. the company's president. A family with deep pockets and deep-rooted traditions. Why? What's so crucial about me being there? I don't get it. Karen answered, "It's essential for you to understand my new position at work, so you can support me in what I do." I still don't see what you're getting at. Mrs. Robinson will explain it better when we arrive. I've always had your back, haven't I? Why should this be any different? In this new position, I've got some unique responsibilities, and said I should ease you into understanding them. It might seem a little strange at first, but she assured me you'd be pleased. By the time we pulled up at the lodge, my adrenaline was already in high gear. It wasn't hard to figure out there was something Karen was hinting at. Looked like this weekend would be interesting. Karen went straight into the lodge as soon as we arrived, leaving me to haul in the bags. I couldn't help feeling a bit put out, like I'd been given my role for the weekend. "Hey, nice car, Mr. Miller. Is that a 70 or a 71? It was Jake Coleman, a younger guy who worked with Karen. "Hey there, Jake. It's a 70. Jake introduced me to his wife, Rachel. They were sitting out on the porch, while everyone else seemed to be inside. Glancing at the parking lot, I guess there were maybe 16 cars and a beat-up old truck parked off to one side. We spent a few minutes talking shop about the Challenger. "So, what are you doing out here? Why aren't you and Rachel inside with everyone else?" "They're just not our type of folks, Mr. Miller. We were actually hoping to head out early, but Mrs. Robinson asked us to stick around. We came in early this morning to help set everything up. The caterers cleared out about an hour ago. I had no clue what this event was really about, but something felt off. Hey, could you two hang around until after the evening reception? I'm feeling a little on edge about all this too. I don't know what's going on, but I've got a bad feeling." Jake grinned and glanced at Rachel, who looked a bit embarrassed by my lame attempted humor. "Sure thing, Mr. Miller. Right, Rachel?" She nodded. "Something told me I'd like this guy." I dressed up for the evening like Karen had insisted, and before long, our hostess led me by the hand to a quiet corner, away from the main crowd. "We're really glad you came out tonight to support Karen," and said, all smiles. "This is a big move for her career, and it's essential she has you in her corner. The bump in her salary and benefits is substantial, and I think you'll be quite pleased. Forgive me for asking, but what exactly are we talking about here?" Karen's been pretty vague whenever I bring it up. She usually just brushes me off, saying to wait for tonight. "Oh, nothing to worry about, James. I think she's just trying to surprise you." You still didn't answer my question. There isn't an official title, really. Let's just say she'll be working as a personal assistant. Got it. Well, the buffet looks fantastic. Thanks for clearing that up. And, oh, please just call me Anne. The next hour, I took my time sampling all the food at the buffet tables. Karen was off chatting with the big names in the room, so I hung around with Jake and Rachel for a bit longer. We'd just finished eating when Mrs. Robinson approached us again. "James, I heard Karen mention that you brought your sports car tonight. I was wondering if you'd be open to running a quick errand for us while we enjoy some drinks." I smiled and nodded, figuring it'd be something simple. "There are 3 cases of wine waiting for us at the store in Holbrook. It's all paid for, you just need to pick it up. You shouldn't have any issues, but if anything comes up, give me a call. Be sure to take your phone with you. I'd be happy to help, and I'll let Karen know and be on my way." As she walked off, I looked over at Jake. "Meet me outside in 5 minutes." When I told Karen about the errand Mrs. Robinson had asked me to run, she just smiled and reminded me, "Don't forget your phone." Interesting that they both were concerned about me bringing my phone. "Jake, I need a small favor." He grinned as I tossed him the keys to the Challenger. "Are you serious?" "Yep. Take it to Holbrook. Grab those 3 cases of wine for Mrs. Robinson and enjoy yourself. I have a feeling there might be a bit of a delay, if you catch my drift." Jake's smile grew. "You got it. Here, take my phone too. Just leave it on the dashboard. If it rings, don't answer it, and whatever you do, don't turn it off. Clear? How long do you want us gone?" "At least 2 hours. Fill up the tank before you head back. Have a good time." The evening had a slight chill, but I was grateful I'd brought a warm jacket. Now all I had to do was wait and observe. From the back porch, I found a spot where I could see most of the lodge's main room. A hot thermos of coffee would have been nice, but I hadn't thought that far ahead. I found a comfortable spot to sit where I could peek in without drawing any attention. Karen looked like the center of the party. I wasn't sure why, but I had a pretty good guess. She laughed, smiled, and mingled like she was a celebrity. About 20 minutes later, I noticed Mrs. Robinson and Karen glance at her phone. I knew exactly what they were doing, checking my location. Thanks to Jake, I was already well on my way to Holbrook. Mrs. Robinson raised her hand to speak, and she and Karen exchanged pleased looks. Everyone seemed to approve. I even caught what sounded like soft applause. Evan Robinson stepped over, took Karen's hand, and the two of them began climbing the grand staircase. At the top, he raised both their hands as if celebrating, and they shared a laugh. The crowd murmured in approval as they continued upstairs. With about an hour and a half before the challenger would be back, I figured I might as well enjoy myself. I always carried my buck folding knife, a gift from my daughters about 10 years ago. It had a solid steel blade and kept its edge well. I looked around the parking lot and decided to start with the cars closest to the lodge. No rush. Carefully, I removed each valve stem cap and tucked them into my jacket pocket. I didn't want to make a mess on the Robinsons' driveway, just enough to add a little inconvenience. 16 cars and 64 valve stem caps later, I still had almost an hour left to kill. What else was there to do? Well, for cars were locked, but the rest were wide open, so I went back to the car nearest the lodge and started removing registration slips. Some were tucked neatly into sun visors, while most were stashed in glove compartments. I wasn't sure what I'd do with them, but I figured they might come in handy someday. I had another half hour before Jake would be back, so I decided to go all in and removed the valve stems on the spare tires too. Since the cars were unlocked, popping the trunks wasn't an issue. 20 minutes later, I had another 10 valve stem caps in my pocket. 2 cars didn't have spare tires. I knew it was petty, maybe even childish, but it gave me a small sense of satisfaction. Confrontation wasn't my thing, so I'd rather handle things in a quiet, underhanded way. It wasn't a self-esteem issue. I didn't feel any need to act tough or heroic. I'd leave that to the alpha types. 20 minutes later, the challenger rolled back up. Jake and Rachel looked like they'd enjoyed themselves. Jake confirmed a delay at the store, just as I'd expected, and hinted that it had likely been arranged in advance. While they were gone, my phone hadn't rung once. I switched it off, popped out the SIM card, and thanked them. They were ready to head home, so I wished them well and strongly suggested they start looking for a new job as soon as possible. As for those cases of wine, probably some high-end stuff, I took the easy route and left all 3 on the lodge porch. I wasn't about to have anyone accusing me of theft. The drive back was peaceful. There wasn't much left in the house I cared about. A few personal papers, my laptop, and the Krugerrands. Originally, I toyed with the idea of setting the house on fire before I left, but I realized that it'd only make Karen look like some kind of martyr. I didn't want to give her that satisfaction. So, after a quick stop to grab my things, I hit the road again, with no note and no wedding ring left behind. I figured she could put the pieces together herself. I took my time driving with no destination in mind. 2 days later, on Monday morning, I called work to let them know. I asked for my final paycheck to be sent to my parents' place in Carlisle. They weren't thrilled that I was leaving without notice, but I apologized and left it at that. A good diner breakfast is hard to beat, and I found one along the way. As I ate, I browsed the classifieds and noticed a listing for a night stalker job at a nearby supermarket. They were looking for someone to stock shelves from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. After breakfast, I swung by the store. It was in an eclectic, old neighborhood in Chattanooga. I spent an hour driving around, getting a feel for the area. It was filled with craftsman-style cottages and a few mobile homes. A small trailer would have been fine, but I was hoping for something a bit nicer. That's when I spotted a sign for an apartment for rent above a garage. I wasn't ready to commit to the supermarket gig just yet, but I didn't want to miss out on that garage apartment. The rental didn't include the garage itself, but I offered an extra $50 a month, and they agreed. The place was small, a one-bedroom with a half-bath, but it had basic furniture: a bed, dresser, table, and chairs. The rent was fair and it was close by, so I took it. The bathroom situation could be sorted out later. At least the Challenger had a safe spot. The job at the supermarket turned out to be a bit different. They had a decent number of applicants, but none they felt comfortable leaving alone in the store overnight. I explained my situation to the owner and was straightforward. He hired me on the spot when I offered to work behind closed doors with no benefits for $1 less than the going rate. He didn't even ask for my social security number. I was happy and so were they. It was only a 10-minute walk from my new place. I spent the rest of the day getting comfortable in my new place. The landlord gave me his internet access code, which was a thoughtful gesture. A quick trip to the local mall got me set up with some kitchen basics, a small microwave, and the essentials: bedding and cleaning supplies. That evening, I canceled my life insurance policies. I figured there wasn't much point in keeping bank accounts or credit cards open. It wouldn't affect Karen one bit. Both our daughters were married and settled, which made leaving easier. No grandkids yet, but I had a feeling that wouldn't be too far off. I gave my daughter Sarah a call to let her know I was okay. I also asked her to be ready to help her mom if needed. Sarah knew I'd left, but Karen hadn't shared any other details with her. She promised to fill in her sister, Olivia. I deleted any missed calls from Karen, then shut off my phone once more. I needed a shower, maybe tomorrow. Not everything was falling into place perfectly just yet. I still needed to find a secure spot for my gold. It might not seem like much to most people, but it mattered to me. I ended up renting a safe deposit box over in Huntsville, Alabama, thinking that might keep it under the radar from anyone back in Chattanooga. Of course, I was kidding myself. It could still be tracked, but it felt like I was making an effort. The drive was almost 2 hours, but I didn't mind. The garage door at my apartment was reasonably secure, but I added a new latch and a heavy-duty lock for good measure. I wasn't taking any chances with my Challenger. Settling into the new job didn't take long. For the first 3 nights, I worked with another guy, then they left me on my own. I didn't have to handle anything in the grocery or meat aisles, which was a plus. The only real challenge was the frozen foods section. After the first 2 weeks, though, I had everything under control. For $20 upfront and $10 a month, I joined a gym, which solved my shower issue. The downside was having to give them a credit card number. That led to another trip to Huntsville to open a credit card with my new bank. I was starting to see how hard it was to truly disconnect from the system. I had to make a few compromises. I didn't know if Karen would bother looking for me or how hard she might try. If it ever came up, I'd deal with it then. I quickly settled into a new routine. My shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and after work, I'd jog 20 minutes or walk half an hour to the gym. At first, I joined mostly just for the shower, but before long, I was actually working out. By the end of the first month, I was spending nearly 2 hours a day in the gym. I started to feel better and even dropped a few pounds. I'd never thought of myself as heavy, just a bit out of shape, and it was nice to get back into a rhythm. I felt good about the job. It was repetitive, but somehow it kept things interesting. It's hard to explain, but I'm sure you know the feeling. I did my work and they left me alone. The gym was also a solid choice. I quickly figured out which exercises I enjoyed and which ones weren't for me. I never got into lifting heavy weights, and since I jogged every day, I had no use for the treadmills. My daily routine started with a 30-minute circuit workout, followed by 20 minutes each on the rowing machine, stepper, and upright bike. I never got around to buying a TV, but I did pick up a used desktop computer with a decent-sized monitor. Most of my entertainment came from watching YouTube. I didn't cook much, but I noticed my eating habits were shifting without much effort. I found myself leaning toward a keto diet. Paired with my odd work hours, I realized I was also doing a bit of intermittent fasting. After 3 months of this routine, I felt better overall and had shed a few pounds. It was time to check in with my daughters again. This time I called Olivia. "Hey, Olivia, it's your dad. Well, it's about time. We've all been worried about you. Are you doing okay?" "Yes, I'm fine, really. Don't worry about me. I've always managed to look after myself. Just calling to see how your mom is doing." "Mom's okay. She actually got a promotion and seems to love her job. But honestly, she's furious with you. She said you abandoned her right in the middle of her promotion celebration and left like a sulking little boy. Her words, not mine. She thinks you're jealous of her success. Well, I'm sorry she sees it that way. I don't have anything else to say about it. Until she's ready to be honest with you, that's all I can give you. She did mention that things have been a bit tight without your income, but the promotion's helping her manage. Good for her. Did she mention what her new position is all about? Just that it comes with a pay bump and lots of travel. I kept quiet, letting her words hang for a moment. Olivia broke the silence. Are you coming home for Christmas? I don't think so. I'll try to send something for you and Sarah, though. Dad, we don't need anything. We'd just rather have you here. Sorry, honey. I've got to go. Say hi to Sarah for me. The call left me feeling down. My daughters didn't seem to understand the real story and seemed to believe I was at the root of the issues. I didn't like it, but I didn't feel the need to justify myself. Karen clearly had no regrets. A bit of bitterness crept in as I thought about it. From what Olivia said, Karen seemed to be getting along just fine without me. I was left wondering why she wanted me around in the first place. That weekend, I polished off a case of Black and Tan, slumping into a bit of a funk. My beer consumption was definitely going up, and my mood wasn't getting any better, but I tried to keep myself occupied. One day, during my usual errands, I ended up at a slightly upscale shopping center. Not flashy, just nicely kept. Harriet still hadn't seen my Challenger, and the subject of me owning it hadn't come up before. As the engine rumbled to life, a few curious folks from her office stepped out to watch as she came outside. I circled around to open her door, enjoying the look on the gawkers' faces. Harriet chuckled as she slid into the passenger seat. Well played, James, well played. I guess now you'll be expecting an engagement ring. All in due time. No reason to rush. I kept the Challenger's power in check until we crossed the Tennessee River, then let her open up a little. Highway 72 heading toward Huntsville has some nice stretches, but it's not exactly ideal for showing off. We parked at Dreamland and settled in for a couple of hours. James, every single person who was at the lodge that night has been served, Harriet said, watching my reaction. What do you mean? Are we talking about a lawsuit? Yes. The official claim is intentional infliction of emotional distress for contributing to the breakdown of a marriage. Is that really a thing? It seems all the criteria are covered. Their actions were intentional, the behavior was extreme, and it caused you significant emotional distress. That might explain why Karen was so upset. We each had a plate of ribs in front of us, and the conversation slowed down as we dug in. Harriet had just finished her last rib when she looked over at me. What do you mean your wife was upset? Sarah called me earlier and mentioned that Karen wanted to talk to me. Apparently, there's a big mess at work, and Karen somehow caught up in it. That's all I know. Robertson and Company is facing $1 million lawsuit. The other 11 individuals are each being sued for $100,000. Not to sound like a smart aleck, but do you really think this will stick? Absolutely. It might not play out exactly how we expect, but there could be some very interesting outcomes. I wanted another beer, but with the long drive back, I couldn't risk it. Harriet, though, enjoyed the moment, savoring her beer with a bit of smug satisfaction. As we were leaving the restaurant, I was feeling a bit bolder, so I casually asked Harriet if she'd like to get a room and head back in the morning. I'd love to, but I can't. Maybe we can leave early if you want. It's not about that, I said, smiling. Let's just head back now, and I'll explain on the drive. The first 20 minutes in the car were silent. Eventually, Harriet opened up. She told me that about 8 years ago, she'd weighed almost 150 kilograms. Instead of choosing gastric bypass surgery, she decided to take on the challenge of dieting and exercise. She ended up losing 70 kilograms, but it left her with roughly 10 kilograms of loose skin. 5 surgeries later, she was left with scars all over her body. With a lot of courage and honesty, Harriet admitted that she was extremely self-conscious about those scars. She'd avoided dating and distanced herself from male friends, keeping people at arm's length. For some reason, she felt comfortable around me, though she couldn't explain why. I dropped her off at her house, walked her to the door, and gave her a light kiss on the cheek. She thanked me for the evening, and as I walked away, I noticed a hint of a tear in her eye. After that, we kept up our platonic dates, and it seemed to suit us both just fine. The supermarket where I worked had gained quite a following among locals. In under 2 years, they'd opened 2 more stores and were scouting for more locations. The owners were serious when they offered me a full-time role as inventory manager for all branches. But to accept, they needed me to become a permanent employee, which meant going fully legit. By then, it didn't seem to matter much, so I accepted. Harriet was happy about it, and that made me happy too. A few more weeks went by without much news from my daughters. Then, out of the blue, I got a short text. Mom got fired. That changed things. Now I had a steady job with decent pay, and Karen was out of work. Suddenly, the possibility of a divorce started looming in my mind. And then, things took an even more interesting turn. James, I actually have some good news for a change. Harriet looked serious, so I gave her my full attention. 3 of the 11 people we sued have settled. What does that mean? It means their insurance companies advised them to pay up the $100,000 to avoid a public court battle. Since it was covered by insurance, it wasn't a huge personal loss for them. You're saying we could actually make some money off this? James, I've already received 3 checks. There might be more coming. Do you think this has anything to do with Karen's firing? I'm almost certain it does. Will this complicate my divorce? Have you filed yet? No, not yet. I was actually hoping you could help me with that. Harriet gave me a genuine smile, one that stretched wide across her face. James, pack a small bag and get the Challenger ready. We're going on a little trip to see your wife. We'll head out early Thursday morning. Now I was smiling too. We left at 6 a.m. sharp and checked into the Sheraton Hotel 10 hours later. The Challenger had practically purred the whole way. I called Sarah and asked her to arrange a lunch with Karen and Olivia at the Reading Motor in the next day. That evening, Harriet and I had a quiet dinner. Picking from the Red Lobster menu was more fun than we'd anticipated, and we ended up spending a bit more than planned. Felt like a celebration, though, so we didn't mind. Our conversation bounced around and got a bit scattered, both of us skirting around the obvious topic. It was, after all, the first night we'd be spending together. We'd been friends without benefits for over a year, and the last thing I wanted was for her to feel pressured. While I'll spare the details, I'll say the night went a lot smoother than either of us expected. We were both a bit out of our element, but we managed just fine, and the outcome was as we'd hoped. Harriet seemed relieved that I wasn't put off, and I was glad it wasn't nearly as daunting as she'd warned me it might be. By the end of it, we were a pair of happy fools. The next morning, we had a late breakfast. When we arrived at the restaurant, Karen and the girls were already seated. I had on one of my new sports coats with a dark turtleneck and looked sharp. Harriet wore a light business suit, casual but still professional. The look on Karen's and my daughter's faces was a mix of surprise and disbelief. Karen, Sarah, Olivia. This is Harriet Parker, my trusted confidant and attorney, I said. Harriet, meet my wife, Karen, and my daughters, Sarah and Olivia. It was awkward, but that was the best I could manage. Before anyone could dive into any awkward small talk, the waiter came by to take our drink orders. I'm not hungry. I'll just have coffee, if that's all right. Karen broke the silence first. A quick glance around the table told me no one else was interested in food either. Why don't you just bring us 5 coffees and leave the pot on the table? I said. The waiter nodded, and a wave of relief seemed to pass over everyone. It's nice to see you again, James. Would you care to fill us in on what you've been up to lately? Karen added with a hint of a smirk. Oh, just working and giving you the freedom to do whatever it is you've been doing. Harriet nudged me lightly under the table. You were supposed to be there for me, and you abandoned me. Karen snapped. Maybe you needed someone, but that someone wasn't me. Dad, stop this. You didn't bring us here to trade insults. What's going on? Sarah said, her tone firm. I realized this meeting would be short, and I felt a bit lost, glancing at Harriet for a cue on how to continue. She stayed silent but took charge of the conversation. Reaching into her purse, Harriet pulled out an envelope and slid it across the table to Karen. "Mrs. Miller, this is a divorce settlement. I believe you'll find it fair. I suggest you take it to your lawyer for review." Both Sarah and Olivia looked stunned, clearly not expecting this. But Karen broke into a wide grin. She didn't even glance at the envelope Harriet had handed her. Instead, she reached into her own bag and pulled out an identical envelope. "You fool. I divorced you 8 months ago for abandonment. You never received the papers because I didn't know where to send them. It's final. Whatever you have there doesn't matter. I don't want anything you have." Her grin turned into a smug smile. Just then, the waiter returned with our coffee and a full pot for the table, right as Karen stood up. She smiled at Harriet and me, gave the girls a peculiar look, and left, leaving both envelopes on the table. "Dad, can we stay for lunch?" Olivia asked, looking hopeful. "I heard they have amazing custard pie here." Harriet and I laughed, and we asked the waiter for menus. The 4 of us, Harriet, Sarah, Olivia, and I, enjoyed a pleasant lunch with good conversation. I felt like I was in another world, never really grasping how women think. By the end of it, the girls had exchanged numbers with Harriet and promised to keep in touch. Back at the hotel, I began packing. "James, I thought we were staying another night. We will, just not here. Let's get packed up." An hour and a half later, we were in Elkton, Maryland. 30 minutes after that, Harriet Parker officially became Harriet Miller. We spent the night in Leesburg, Virginia. I would have loved to drive further, but we decided to take it easy. Now we have a house with a 3-car garage, but that's another story. Later, the girls told me Karen threw a fit when she found out I received $2 million from Robertson and Company. She eventually moved to Iowa. Why? I have no idea.